We all know how to fight off vampires, don't we? I mean, garlic crosses a stake through the heart, right? But what other facts, confirmed by the real old-time beliefs, can help you defend yourself against these undead imbibers of blood and life energy this Halloween season? Let's look at 6 lesser-known ways. First, a little background about how a vampire was thought to come to be. According to one of the best books on the real historical vampire lore, called The Vampire, Their Kith and Kin, by Montague Summers, people were thought to become vampires in a couple of ways. For one, if they dabbled in black magic during their lifetime, this corruption of the soul, together with the powers afforded to the witch or warlock, could lead to their transforming into a sinister and predatory vampire after death, rather than calmly sinking into sleep and their eternal rest. But not only this, the werewolf and the vampire, both staples of classic horror films, were actually closely connected in the real folklore of Europe. As we said, occult practices could create vampires, and of course, someone could only become a werewolf as a result of some kind of sorcery. It was understood back then that only a witch or a warlock could become a werewolf, really, and so, naturally, if they were in the habit of prowling around the dark forests at night in the form of a beast, then of course that corrupted and black magic-infused werewolf would also end up becoming a vampire when once the lycanthrope finally dies. Maybe due to this, the ancient people of places like, say, Germany or Romania always associated wolves with vampires. It was thought, for instance, that if a wolf had any contact with a corpse before it was buried, that this alone could somehow infect the corpse, and that contagious animal essence could lead that dearly departed, therefore, to revert to a vampire after burial. This kind of contagious animal influence upon corpses likely started by the observed association of former werewolves with vampires, made so even for a cat to jump over a corpse before it was buried was feared to be a sure path to vampirism. This mania against animals contacting corpses grew so strong, in fact, that all animals were banished from the home, at least for as long as a corpse might also be there. The two were never allowed to be in the same home together at the same time. And so, method number 1 for defeating a vampire, which might be lesser known than most, is simply to not let your sons grow up to be vampires. No witchcraft, no lycanthropy, no cats jumping over your corpses. Be firm with your kids and save yourselves a little trouble down the line. But if your sternest warnings fail, and your dearly departed had dabbled in werewolfism prior to death, well, there are a few ways you can rid yourself of the pesky bloodsucker if you find them knocking on your doors at night. It was thought that vampires almost always visited people they knew in life. Even having someone over to dinner just once was apparently enough to equal an open invitation for that person, if they just so happened to end up a vampire to come knocking on your door, apparently for dessert. So, you might want to be just tiny bit pickier about who you invite to that Halloween party this year. But anyway, this meant knowing what to do if you hear that sinister knock one dark midnight was essential. Garlic, as it turns out, was an actual deterrent, veritable vampire repellent the world over, verified by folklore. But did you know that they could also be lured into your home in order to trap them in a bottle? It's true, this practice of bottling your pesky vampire was actually quite common. There were even professional vampire bottlers. And here was their vampire bottling method. The professional vampire bottler, that's a new dream job by the way, was armed with some kind of talisman of repelling, like garlic or a holy item. He lied in ambush, waiting for the vampire to come. When he sees him, he pursues him with his vampire-repelling talisman. The poor unfortunate vampire might then take refuge in a tree or up on the roof of a house. They apparently seek high ground, much like cats, But the vampire bottler follows him up with his talisman, driving him away from all shelter and means of escape in the direction of a bottle he has specially prepared, in which is placed some of the vampire's favorite food. God knows what that was. Maybe blood sausage. I guess that was a trick of the vampire bottler's trade, as they don't reveal that secret, much like the Colonel's secret recipe. So, having no other means of escape, the vampire enters this prison and is immediately fastened down with a cork, on the interior of which is a fragment of the vampire-repelling talisman. The bottle is then thrown into a fire, and the vampire disappears forever. In fact, burning was another one of those things we all know about as a surefire way to destroy the vampire. That's known to most of us. But what isn't often included in the Hollywood treatment of the folklore is that if any vermin, like worms or insects, try to escape the fire where the vampire is burning, they must be driven back into the flames, as this could be the vampire, in fact, trying to make his final escape from his fiery doom. If you have a bottled vampire, of course, it may well be a bit tempting to invite a few friends over for a vampire viewing party. I know, but it isn't recommended. You never quite know when some overly tipsy partygoer might mistake your vampire for another bottle of your fine Italian wine, and so discover, firsthand maybe, why they say that vampires never drink wine. Lastly, although we all know that a stake in the heart can dispatch a vampire forever, prior to the mandatory head removal and subsequent vampire roasting, did you know that only the aspen, the hawthorn, or the whitethorn tree should be used for full effect? That leftover pine handle of that old broomstick in your garage? Yeah, sorry, no, that won't quite do the job. Either splurge for the premium whitethorn stake, or you'll just have to get used to a certain amount of nightly bloodletting in your life, I guess. This is not the kind of situation where you want to be cheap, my friends, but if you can't afford that premium whitethorn stake or the services of a professional vampire bottler, well, you could always opt for a dagger. But not just any old dagger, a consecrated dagger placed upon a sacred altar and blessed by a priest in a mysterious ceremony involving the burning of frankincense and the sprinkling of holy water. Priests are often known for their charity, so this dagger might be an option for the vampire hunter on a shoestring budget. But if you are ready now to stake yourself a vampire, consecrated dagger in hand, keep in mind this last little-known fact. The stake must be driven in completely, and with only one blow. Failure to do this right the first time can lead to catastrophe. In one tale, a burly, strong vampire hunter had just staked a fiend, striking him once, and upon being stricken, the fiend strikes out and says, "If you want to destroy me, hit me a second time." Luckily, an older, wiser companion stopped the young man just as he was about to take the fiend's advice and strike again, saying, "Smite not a second time, for then he will not die but will live and destroy us." So he accordingly stayed his hand, and luckily the ghoul expired. So, better not trust these things when they offer their helpful advice on how to destroy them. One final detail. A strong young vampire hunter like the one I've just described might in fact be your best bet. The Greeks called the vampire vikor kikts, which means like a drum. This is because it was known over there that the vampire could become so engorged with blood that it bloats, its skin becoming ever thicker and harder until it is like a drum, and sounds just like one apparently, according to accounts. If you were ever to be so bold as to play a little bongo tune on a vampire's belly just to find out for yourself. And so a great deal of strength was actually needed to penetrate the vampire's torso in one blow as required. One of the very first real and documented cases of vampirism in history clearly demonstrates this last point. And much of the other points we've learned besides this evening, this was a famous case of Jure Grando, who lived in the small village of Kringa in Istria, now Croatia. He was a local peasant. He died in 1656 and was buried in the village cemetery. According to local lore, however, after his death, predictably, strange events began to occur. For 16 years, villagers reported seeing Grando walking around the town at night. It was said that he would knock on the doors of certain houses, and whoever's door he knocked on would soon die. Grando was not only said to roam the village, but he was also believed to terrorize his widow, appearing in her bedroom at night and subjecting her to terrifying visions. She described him as roughly the same as he was before, but with a ghastly smile frozen on his face, difficulty breathing, and of course being cadaverous and disgusting. Eventually, however, the town took notice, and the priest, Father Giorgio, and a group of brave villagers decided to act. One night, Father Giorgio encountered the vampire in person. Confronting him, he raised a cross to his face. The vampire fled to the cemetery, giving the priest and villagers hope that they could stop the terror once and for all. Gathering a group of locals led by the prefect, Latinod, they decided to dig up Giure's grave. To their horror, Giure's corpse looked fresh and alive. His cheeks were flushed, and he wore a peaceful smile. Some villagers were so frightened that they fled, but Father Giorgio and the prefect rallied the group. The first attempt to pierce his heart with a hawthorn stake, fine choice of stakes, failed, however, as the stake bounced off his unnaturally hard skin. Aha, told you so. We're gonna need a bigger stake, or a bigger, more jacked vampire hunter. Undeterred, the group returned a few nights later. They tried once more to pierce his heart, but the stake failed again. In a final desperate act, Giorgio performed an exorcism. Someone took an axe and decapitated the vampire. When the blade struck, Giure let out a bone-chilling scream, and so much blood poured out from his body that it filled the grave. This violent second death of Giure Grando finally brought peace to Kringa, and the vampire's reign of terror ended. His story has since become a part of Istrian folklore, and the legend of Giure Grando remains one of the most famous and earliest historically documented cases of vampirism. His grave and the Church of St. Peter and Paul in Kringa are reminders of this chilling chapter of the village's history. So now, armed with your premium whitethorn stake, your jacked vampire hunter friend, and all the lesser-known secrets of defeating a vampire which you've picked up this evening, it could well be that a trip to Kringa, Croatia might just earn a spot on your bucket list. Don't forget your specially prepared bottle, your talisman, and your vampire bait. You know, just in case you want to bring home a truly unique souvenir. I can't think of a finer Halloween decoration than a vintage Croatian red, aged to perfection with just the right amount of bite. Well, that just about wraps up tonight's tale from Lorehound. Join us as we sniff out more of history's most interesting stories.
As the hound dog entered the dimly lit library, he sensed an aura of mystery surrounding the ancient scrolls. The dusty shelves towered above him as he sniffed his way through the labyrinth of books. Suddenly, he picked up a scent and followed it to a secluded corner. With bated breath, he approached the shelf and pawed at the book, revealing the hidden scroll. As he rolled it out, he knew he had discovered a treasure worth protecting at all costs.